Welcome to TW Sports Talk, everybody. This is October 7th, 3 games into the Flyers season with an 0-3 start. But aside from, the unfortunate weak start, today the news broke. Rather surprisingly, a little soon maybe, but Peter Laviolette was fired today as the Flyers head coach. And my going into this year, we knew that this was quite a possibility if the Flyers did not perform up to standards. But I got to be honest. This is a little too soon. I mean, 3 games into an 82 game season. I know this is definitely the start has been disappointing. But still, I think this is perhaps a little early to fire Peter Laviolette for it. I mean, there's always a chance to turn it around, especially this early in the season. But um, and I mean, it's not a lot of it. I think is just hockey that you can't coach. I mean, you look at that first game against the Maple Leafs. Um, they had a significant amount of more shots than Toronto did in that first game last week, and I mean they had 30 some shots and they could only put it in one time, and this was the night after the Toronto Maple Leafs really duked it out against their division rivals, the Montreal Canadiens, and had a rather interesting one goal game. It was rough. It was indisciplined, and they had to get to bed late that night. And the Flyers come out and they look pretty weak against them. Only score one goal, even though they seemed to control the game and they had more power. They had definitely some power play advantages. They only cashed in one time in that game, and that was on a power play. It was one of 7 power plays. Um, so to me, I mean, it's not all Peter Laviolette's fault here, at least this early part of the season, but perhaps there's a message that's not getting across, or hasn't been a message that just hasn't been getting across. I'm gonna Let's see, in this edition of TW Sports Talk, this Flyers Talk edition, we're gonna snippet a little bit of a press conference from earlier, a little later, but I'm also I'm gonna I'm gonna read just the ESPN report, a little gist of the reasoning behind this firing. So let me read this here. I thought our training camp, quite frankly, was one of the worst training camps I've ever seen, Ed Snyder, the chairman and owner of the team, said. I'm not talking about wins or losses. There was just nothing exciting. Nobody shined. Nobody looked good. I couldn't point to one thing that I thought was positive, and unfortunately my worries were realized. He only needed 3 games to make a move. After a winless start, the Flyers fired Peter Laviolette on Monday, today, 3 seasons after he led them to the Stanley Cup. Assistant coach Craig Berube, in his 7th season coaching within the organization, was promoted to replace Laviolette, his 18th coach in franchise history. Despite a preseason vote of confidence from ownership, offense, a pair of journeymen in goal, and a patchwork defense to jolt the Flyers out of their job. He dealt with rumors of his firing last season, in which the Flyers missed the playoffs after the lockout shortened the campaign. It was the only season in which he failed to make the postseason in Philadelphia. So, it's just a general idea here of, uh, obviously last season, um, Ed Snyder, I believe, called it last season an anomaly. but obviously he wasn't happy with the 1-5-1 training camp that they mustered up and this 0-3 start. But like I said, to be honest, I don't place a lot of blame on Peter Laviolette. He doesn't necessarily control the players that he has. And in the offseason, they did make some additions. Vincent LeClavier, I mean, thus far he has a goal and assist. So I mean, he's pretty. But there's just other guys on this roster that I don't think are, But it also comes down to a big mindset too. This mentality that has been a Flyers staple within the organization for years, going back to the Broad Street Bully days. Back in the '70s when they did win 2 back-to-back Stanley Cups. But I'm gonna share a bit of this press conference with you, and it gets a little testy, no doubt. Towards the end of the press conference, I'm going to play a few minutes of it, and there's a very interesting question that for lack of better terminology, it took balls to ask.
I agree.
You'll hear it, but it definitely speaks a lot of the way I see a problem with this organization, how they haven't won a Stanley Cup in 38 years, and that a possible suggestion is that the Flyers just have not been able to get a fresh perspective, at least in the coaching department, for a long time. Now, Peter Laviolette, it can somewhat be somewhat of an exception of that. But this new coach that they're hiring, I mean, that they essentially promoted, Berube, he's essentially, it's like they hired the guy that was standing next to the guy that got fired. This is a guy within the organization. So a bit of a bad feedback there, but anyhow, I'm going to play this snippet of the press conference and definitely look for the interesting question and the interesting answer, I think, that comes out of it.
Was there sold any players before making that decision? No. No players. No players. No. Was there something that you were looking for from Laviolette? I know you said last year you didn't really think about firing him, but that you were not happy even in training camp this year. Was there something he could have done?
No, I think Peter worked his hardest to try to get things turned around. He's as frustrated as all of us right now. When I met with him this morning, he expressed his frustration about trying everything. He gave it all he could to try to get things turned around.
So is this more a case maybe of his message not getting through to the players, and then is it about what he was doing?
Maybe. Sometimes that happens in all sports. Sometimes teams need fresh ideas or a new voice or whatever. But Peter Laviolette worked his ass off for the Flyers, and it just came to that point where I said it was a gut feeling on my part where I felt we needed to make a change.
Paul, this is not an interim tag, right?
No, it's not.
Do you sign a multi-year deal?
Those things are internal. It's more than this year, yes.
And you said a few weeks ago that Peter wasn't on the hot seat. What has changed after 3 games, and do you share some of the concerns that Paul does?
First of all, it's Paul's job to make these kinds of decisions. From my own point of view, I'm very disappointed in the start that we've had. And quite frankly, I was very disappointed in the preseason that we had. And, I'm hoping for better. We always try to make the team as good as we possibly can, and sometimes we're not right. But hopefully this time, it'll work out in our behalf.
I haven't talked to Craig yet, and I don't mean this as a matter of disrespect to him, but are you worried at all about the perception of an insular kind of attitude by bringing in someone such, given the fact that you guys haven't won a cup in 38 years? Why bring in somebody who is steeped in that sort of culture?
What's your culture?
A culture that hasn't won a championship.
We haven't won a championship. We've been in the Stanley Cup Finals a lot of times, and we've been in the playoffs a lot of times, and the culture is to win. 30 teams are trying to win the Cup, and we're doing our damnedest to do it. That's our culture.
And
that's our culture.
A fresh perspective.
No, we don't need a fresh perspective. We have a pretty good culture, and we know who we're dealing with.
Craig, specifically, what are some of the changes you think need to be made right away with the approach and how the players go through for each game?
Well, first of all, team defense. You know, I don't think we're playing well enough without the puck. So, I mean, we need to play a lot better without the puck, and I think we need to compete a lot harder.
All right, we'll cut it there. So, you heard about 30 seconds ago, that interesting exchange. I give credit to the asker there, that question, and I mean, he made a good point. I mean, this culture that hasn't won a Stanley Cup in 38 years, and they, you heard Paul say they've been trying their darnest to win that Stanley Cup, but they've been trying their hardest, and that 30 teams are trying, to get after the same prize. But see, that's not the point. I mean, yeah, everybody's, but the point is making the moves. It's not just all about, Will. You got to be smart about what you do too, and I think it's the mentality of the organization in general. The fresh perspective ideal that interviewer asked. I mean, that was a great question, and it took that's a good journalist right there. And yeah, I mean, of course, there's 30 teams trying to win the Stanley Cup and all this and that. He points out how we've been to several Stanley Cup finals, but that's not the point. I mean, because what we want is a championship. I mean, all the times that in the Eagles organization where, NFC championship loss after NFC championship loss, finally getting the Super Bowl but losing, with Donovan McNabb and Andy Reid in the former era. Yeah, we fans have been unsatisfied. We want that championship. I mean, 38 years ago, that's great. A lot of Flyer fans were not born there. We're not born at that time, or we're just rolling around in their diapers, and didn't really get to enjoy the Stanley Cup, championships that were won during that time period. It's, yeah, you got 30 teams fighting after it, but if you put that into perspective, each year, in the span of 30 years, you would hope, if you do the math, you would hope that if you were a friend, you would hope out of 30 years you would get one championship. If every team got a championship, within 30 years, 30 teams, etc. That's kind of like how the odds, if you're just straight up thinking about odds and not franchise, abilities of a franchise, that's theoretically how, to me that would be. But also when you're a big market. Philadelphia is a big sports market. It's a top 5 sports market here, and this is the same arguments used when it comes to the Philadelphia Eagles. Having not won a championship yet, the standards are different. It's as simple as that. I mean, 38 years and you haven't won a championship. You've been trying your hardest. Why haven't you been? Maybe you do need a fresh perspective. And I'm not trying to, take the spot, sell this the new coach short, that what you heard, he's not also going to be he doesn't have the interim tag. He was signed to a deal. I'm not trying to deflate that, but it's that was a great question, and I think you could tell that Paul Holmer got a little worked up over it and did not like it, and you know, I thought his response was a little weak. Um, you know, yeah, I mean, in 38 years, I mean, why haven't you know, you've been to several Stanley Cups, so what? I mean, they went to they went to one in the past about 15 years, if you break it down. When they in the late 90s, you know, they faced off against the Red Wings in the finals. Um, a few years ago, you know, they lost to Chicago in the Stanley Cup playoffs, in the finals. You know, I mean, so I mean, this is a, you know, what have you done for me lately, league, and you know, to me, that's how sports are. This town, that's how, you know, definitely how it is, and you know, for the same reason with Andy Reid getting fired. You know, what had he done for us lately? Well, there was a gradual decline. You know, from a 10-6 to an 8-8 season to a 4-12 disaster, and you know, just not achieving the same kind of success um, as he once did. And you know, perhaps that was a rationale to fire Peter Laviolette. Um, I mean, if you think about it, there's kind of been a gradual decline there. Um, but the bottom line here is that um, you know, I'm regarding I'm going targeting this question here, and how Paul Holmgren answered it. Because you know, they're the guy, him and Ed Snyder. I mean, ultimately they find the coach. Um, it's a bit of a different situation. Peter Laviolette's not picking, you know, the player, or he wasn't picking the players, and you know, it's a little different with the Flyers than it was with, say, you know, Andy Reid here. Um, you know, when he coached the Eagles, and you know, he picked personnel. He had a, you know, big hand in that, along with the general manager. It's a little different here, and you know, if they're gonna, you know, hopefully, you know, the point is to, you know, win the Stanley Cup, obviously. Um, and with this, for the most part, this mentality that they've had for, you know, dating back to, like I said, the Broad Street Bully days, you know, the Flyer way, the gritty, you know, hard nosed hockey style that, you know, it's kind of been uh, their staple for years. You know, you wonder, is really, maybe they do need a fresh perspective in the organization if you want to win Stanley Cups, or a Stanley Cup even, you know, after a near 40-year drought. Um, so that's, to me, that's what it comes down to. And you know, I mean, who knows? This coach, who knows? Maybe he could be very good. I'm not going to write him off yet, but um, you know, I mean, they haven't. They actually, the Flyers they've fired more coaches in the NHL. They've made more coaching changes in the NHL, I believe, than any team, I think, in the last 30 years. You know, over the past 30 years, they've made more head coaching changes than any team in the NHL. I think that was brought up earlier in the press conference. Um, I'm not totally sure. If I remember correctly, Paul says he's not totally sure if, or he says, is that stat actually accurate? Or he asks, you know, he sends back that question to the guy who asks the question, or is coming up with the question. I don't, you know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there could be a lot of truth to that. Maybe that is pretty true, or you know, or very true. I don't know, but um, you know, for making a lot of all these coaching changes with kind of the same mindset, I don't know if it's, you know, is it maybe time to change the mindset a little more of this organization? To me, that's what it's coming down to. Um, and you know, you heard Paul Holmgren say about the culture of you know, he doesn't, you know, that he doesn't want to really change the culture. Um, And like I said, like we said earlier, the culture that hasn't won a Stanley Cup in 38 years. I thought that was gold. But and I mean, as a Philadelphia sports fan, you hate to hear that, but that's kind of that's the truth, and nothing but the truth. So we'll see. I mean, focus now though is getting out of this 0-3 hole and getting something going. But with a new coach, new head coach, getting things underway here, I don't know how the season is going to play out. I just don't. I mean, 3 games and they have three goals total. One seems to be the magic number each game. They score one goal and that's it. And that's they lost to Carolina last night, back to back nights. But Carolina, is coming off a bad season. Next team they play is the Florida Panthers, who are coming off a 7-0 blowout that they lost. Obviously, they were the victims of a 7-0 blowout. It's going to be Tuesday night, tomorrow night. So I mean, it's to me it's a must win. I know it's an 82 game season, but you can't, after a devastating loss like that, if and after your 0-3 start, if they're not, maybe a lift from a new coach here, they gotta get something going here. And again, I'm not I haven't expected them to be a cup contender this year and be a potential division winner. No, but you know make the playoffs, I think, was what was expected here. And like I said, it might have been too soon to really fire Peter Laviolette. Maybe could have waited, seen how, maybe 10 more games played out. I don't know. But it is what it is at this point, and Peter Laviolette's, coaching career here in Philadelphia is over. And with that in mind, that makes Chip Kelly now the dean of Philadelphia coaches. That's right. Only about 9 months in the job, and of the big major four sports teams here in Philadelphia, he is the longest tenured coach. So how about that? Um, and he actually had a little something to say about this fire. And let me scroll down here. It says it's kind of the crazy reality of what we deal with, but it's unfortunate. Chip Kelly said, "I know Pete a little bit. He's a good guy, So Chip Kelly a little something to say about that, and you know, coming off that Eagles win last night, which, by the way, me and Wayne here in TW Sports Talk are gonna talk about, and in the middle of this week, so look for that. But yeah, I mean, the Flyers did kind of make some noise today. They did steal some of the spotlight off the Eagles after their win last. So it's interesting, I guess, but it caught me by surprise. I didn't think after an 0-3 start that would happen. I could have, they continued to play that poorly. I would have thought maybe 15, 20 games in, maybe that would have happened, but that wasn't the case. So we'll see what how if the Flyers can progress from here. That's just plain and simple. It's a long season, but it's a new coach. Um, the way they've started off, I'm a little less optimistic about this team this season. Um, so it's a bit unfortunate, and after that training camp too, that it was rather weak. Maybe this is just going to be another disappointing season for the Philadelphia Flyers, where they do not make the playoffs. We'll have to wait and see. With that in mind, thanks for tuning in this edition of TW Sports Talk, this Flyers edition. As I just mentioned a minute ago, the Eagles edition of TW Sport, the NFL edition football edition, whatever you want to call it, of TW Sports Talk will drop, in a day or two here on the channel. So look for that, as well as the Great Wrestling Debate if you are a wrestling fan. So with that in mind, thanks for tuning in as always.